Hello, world history students. This is Mrs. Politsky, and I have notes for Chapter 18, Section 3, talking about the monarchy in England. And today we finished up taking our test over chapters 15 and 16. And so if you have not done the test yet, make sure that you stop in to arrange a time to make that happen. But we're going to start a unit talking about different revolutions that were taking place in Western Europe over the course of a couple hundred years. And this day we're going to focus on a revolution that took place in England. And we've got to talk a little bit about the Stuart family. And as we go along here, we're gonna mention a few things. We're going to talk about James I, Charles I, Charles II, and James II, or as I like to call it, JCCJ. Um, the James the First, or the Stuart family in general, were kind of a controversial family. They followed the leadership of Elizabeth I, and because Elizabeth didn't have any heirs, a new family had to rise to power and take over England. So as we go along, fill in what you need, and we're going to get started here talking a little bit about the monarchy in England. So we're going to talk about James I. He became king in 1603, and he believed in divine right kings, this idea that God has selected only a handful of people to become monarchs. He immediately had problems with Parliament because he was always needing money. He's probably remembered for a few things. You know, there is something called the King James Bible, which is a rendition of the Protestant Bible that sounds a lot like Shakespearean literature, if you ever see a copy of that. Another thing that came about after the reign of King James I was his son, King Charles I. And Charles I was kind of a wild child. He liked to spend money, and occasionally he would spend money and then use it all up, and then he needed more money. And so at some point in time, he was forced to sign a document called the Petition of Right. The Petition of Right limited the power of King Charles I, but after signing it, he ignored the document. It basically stated that Charles could not collect taxes without the consent of Parliament, and that a king could not imprison anyone without just cause, and troops would not be housed on private land without the consent of the owner, and the king could not declare what is known as martial law unless the country was at war. Okay, right? Some of these are items that we actually find within our American Bill of Rights. When we talk about collecting taxes, maybe that's a little different story here, but when you talk about the concept of imprisoning persons without just cause, we find a little bit of that referred to in the Fifth Amendment. And the Third Amendment to the Constitution talks a little bit about this idea of quartering troops on private land without the consent of the owner and compensation. Martial law, if you've ever been grounded, you've probably experienced martial law. It's the idea of having curfews and your movement restricted. All those things came to pass after the Petition of Right was signed, and hence the people of England were mad, and eventually they kind of declared war on the king. Eventually he was captured, and unfortunately he lost his head. He was beheaded in the whole process. This period of time that Charles and Parliament kind of butted heads was known as the Long Parliament, and it lasted about 20 years, and it basically was set up to limit the power of the king. In the Civil War, those people who were supporters of Charles I were known as Cavaliers or Royalists. Those people who were in opposition to Charles were known as the Roundheads. And that's because these people sported short hair, like this fellow right here, and were very pro-Parliament. All right, after the Civil War, a man named Oliver Cromwell rose to power, and he was able to place England again under military rule. He ruled for a time, and there's some concern about maybe some of his actions. He certainly was not necessarily very fond of Roman Catholics, and for a time there are some people that have stated that maybe he had outlawed the practice of celebrating Christmas. After a time, the people got fed up with our friend Cromwell, and in 1660, Charles II, the son of Charles I, became King of England. The return of the House of Stuart to the throne was known as the Restoration because we're restoring the throne. Okay, the big thing to remember about Charles II is, he was kind of a big wig, and if you kind of see the wigs that he wore here, yeah, he sported the big hair before it was popular in the 1980s. With new powers of Parliament, England's form of government became a constitutional monarchy, making the monarch's power limited by the Constitution. But that didn't necessarily change King Charles's desire for money and to party and such. And in time, he's kind of forced out of office. Uh, Number 8, in bargaining over what is known as an Exclusion Act, Parliament established the principle of habeas corpus, which is said that people could not be held in prison without just cause. In other words, in Latin, if you broke this down, you must produce a body of evidence. That's where the corpse comes through. And this is something that you're going to find within the Fifth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, within that Bill of Rights. All right. After Charles II was kind of run away from power, he was forced out of office. We had his brother James II come to power in England. James had lived in England during the time, or had lived in England before this period of time, but when Cromwell came to power, he fled to France, and in France he had married a woman who was a Roman Catholic, and many people suspected that James II was also a practicing Catholic. So he ignored Parliament and was eventually overthrown. And this overthrow was known as the Glorious Revolution or the Bloodless Revolution. And he would be succeeded by William and Mary of Orange. Okay, they were Dutch. Mary, if I am correct, is perhaps maybe the daughter of King James II. All right. Hope you got everything written down.